The next question that I hear all the time is what is the difference between Part 61 and Part 141? First off, what is part? What does part mean? Well, everything that we do in aviation is dictated by the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. And the FAA has a set of regulation, of rules that we have to follow. And these rules are contained in the Code of Federal Regulation. I don't want to bore you with all the detail, but the Code of Federal Regulation is divided into titles, and then within each titles, there's different parts. This is where Part 61 and Part 141 come from. Part 141 is the regulation that deals with flight schools, some flight schools. Some flight schools operate under Part 141. Other flight schools operate under Part 61. Now you're going to say, why would they do that? Well, Part 141 flight schools usually have a curriculum that is organized. And they went to the FAA and they said, hey, we want to train people to do private pilot, instrument, commercial, and here's how we're going to do it. And they submit a curriculum, a training plan, a training curriculum. The FAA goes through it and says, approved, you can train people using this training. In exchange, because you're telling the FAA how you're going to train people, and you can usually train people with less hours than you would under Part 61. If you remember earlier, I said, in order to be a private pilot, you need to have 40 hours of total time. In order to be a commercial pilot, you need to have 250 hours of total time. Well, if you're training under Part 141, 40 hours becomes 35 hours, and 250 hours becomes 190 hours. So you get a reduction in the number of minimum hours to do training. Now you're going to say, but you said 60, 65 hours is the average. You get it. In order to get the private, Part 61, Part 141 doesn't really make a difference because you're going to be over these hours anyway, okay? For commercial, it's a different story. Part 141 commercial is a big advantage. All the flight training programs I've managed were Part 141 training. And there's advantages to Part 141. The big advantage is that you're going to have an organized training. You're going to have a training plan. You're going to have what's called a syllabus, and you'll be able to basically see everything that you're going to do for the next lesson. You're going to start with lesson 1, and then you're going to go to lesson 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's organized. You can pull your syllabus and you can say, what are we doing tomorrow? You can look at it and you can say, hey, we're doing steep turns, turn around a point, whatever it is, and you can be ready for the lesson. Part 61 is more open. Your flight instructor may say, hey, today we're going to do landings, and then tomorrow we're going to do steep turns. It can be all over the place, a little bit less organized from my experience. I've also seen flight schools under Part 61 that use a syllabus, and this is great because now you can have the same organization that you have under Part 141, but for Part 61. Under Part 141, flight schools that are Part 141 have a lot more FAA oversight. Ask me how I know, because I've dealt with the FAA for all the time that I manage flight schools. And this is good. This is good for you, the customer, because everything is verified all the time. Another advantage of Part 141 is that in some cases, some flight schools are allowed to do the check ride in-house. You know that final exam that you do with the FAA before you get your certificate? In some cases, it can be done with their own employees, which means you don't have to pay for a designated pilot examiner. Some of the downside of Part 141 is if you already have experience, you came from somewhere else, a Part 61 flight school, and you want to join a Part 141 training program, then in this case, you're going to get very few credit for what you've done. And it's likely you're going to have to start from scratch. So if you're transferring to a different school, you can transfer and do training under Part 61. It gets more complicated. If you have a question about this, if you already have experience flying somewhere else and you want to transfer to another school, just leave a comment and I'll be able to walk you through the different steps. I don't want to make this course too much in depth, but I want to give you options. It is possible to go to a Part 141 school and still do training under Part 61. It is not possible to go to a Part 61 school and just do training under Part 141. Another downside of Part 141 is the fact that because there is more oversight, there's a need for more people usually, and it usually becomes more expensive for the customer. So Part 141 schools are going to be a little bit more expensive because of the overhead that they get. But I'll tell you one thing. Your certificate at the end of it, where it says private pilot, single engine, land, is going to be exactly the same if you go to a Part 61 or to a Part 141 school. All right? They provide you the same certificate. It does not say 61 or 141 on your license at the very end. It just says private pilot. So keep that in mind. This is kind of an important thing.